At 2:15 a.m., the police called me and said that my 8-year-old grandson was wandering alone in freezing rain on the highway. But when I turned toward the room next door, the boy was still sound asleep under his superhero blanket. I drove to the police station, in utter confusion, only to freeze when I looked through the two-way glass. The child sitting there had a face exactly like my grandson's. Even the crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear matched 100%. That was not a random coincidence. It was the beginning of a horrifying crime that my own biological son had buried for the past 8 years. Welcome to Father's Hidden Card. If you are wondering why a father and mother could be so heartless as to abandon their own newborn child, keep watching, because the truth behind it is 100 times more horrifying. Leave comment number 1 so we can begin the story, and don't forget to subscribe and hit like, because I believe you're going to enjoy this story. My name is Harrison Mitchell. I am 72 years old this year. I spent 42 years working on commercial construction sites. These hands have poured thousands of cubic yards of concrete. These eyes have inspected thousands of blueprints. I know one thing very well. If even a small crack appears in the foundation, the entire high-rise building will eventually collapse. But I never imagined that the most dangerous crack would be right inside my own family. That night, a snowstorm swept through the town. Freezing rain hammered against the metal roof with a sharp, rattling sound. The eerie noise sounded like metal tearing through the air. The smell of damp pine wood and stove smoke rose thickly around me. At exactly 2:15 a.m., the landline rang. It roared through the silent night. The shrill ringing pierced my head like an alarm warning of collapsing scaffolding. I jolted awake. My old legs slipped into a worn pair of leather slippers. My heart pounded wildly. A terrible premonition ran down my spine. I hurried through the dark hallway. I gently pushed open my grandson's bedroom door. The globe-shaped nightlight was still casting a soft blue glow. Beneath the superhero blanket, Mason was still lying there. His chest rose and fell steadily. He was sleeping soundly. His peacefulness reassured me for a moment. I picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was Sergeant Brody's urgent voice. "Harrison, is this Mr. Mitchell? You need to come to the police station immediately. We were just patrolling Interstate 95. Highway patrol officers just picked up a child. He was wandering alone in the middle of the snowstorm. He is suffering from severe hypothermia." I frowned. My voice was hoarse. "Sergeant, you're mistaken. My grandson is asleep in his room. I just checked on him." The other end of the line went silent for 3 seconds. There was only the sound of restrained, heavy breathing. Then Brody whispered, his voice as cold as the ice outside. "I'm not mistaken, Harrison. I'm looking at the child right now. I've been to your house for Mason's birthday party before. This child, he has a face exactly like your grandson's. Not a single detail is different. You need to come here right now." The call abruptly disconnected. The busy signal seemed to go on forever. My hand began to shake. The receiver slipped from my grasp. I hurriedly threw on my yellowed canvas coat stained by rain. I pulled on my heavy work boots. Those boots had been with me through hundreds of construction projects. I rushed out of the house. My old pickup truck swayed along the slippery highway. The windshield wipers ran at full speed. They scraped back and forth across the ice-coated glass. Freezing rain hammered relentlessly against the body of the truck. It sounded like thousands of iron needles striking down. In the vast darkness, I could see hidden cracks spreading wider. A structure built on lies was about to collapse, and I was driving straight into that storm. I slammed on the brakes. The pickup truck skidded a long distance across the icy pavement in front of the police station. The sharp smell of burned rubber filled my nose. I rushed through the heavy glass doors. The inside of the police station was cold and bleak. The bitter smell of stale coffee mixed with the harsh scent of bleach. The air was thick with exhaustion. Sergeant Brody led me through a narrow hallway. He stopped in front of the observation room. Looking through the two-way glass, my heart seemed to stop. The child was curled up on a cold metal chair. He was wrapped in an oversized gray police fleece blanket. His body was tiny. He trembled constantly. His soaking wet hair clung to his pale forehead. The bones of his spine protruded beneath his thin back. The clothes he was wearing were paper-thin. He had endured the freezing rain for hours. He was a perfect copy of Mason. The same hooded eyes. The same narrow, high-bridged nose. The same small mouth. A paramedic stepped closer. She gently brushed the wet hair behind the child's left ear to check for injuries. I froze. Under the flickering fluorescent light, a dark red crescent-shaped birthmark stood out as clear as day. It was right behind his left ear. My vision blurred. My head spun. That birthmark could not be faked. I had held Mason in my own arms when he was only a few hours old. I had seen that birthmark myself, but Mason was still sleeping safely at my house. So who was this skinny, ragged child? I pulled out my phone. My trembling hand dialed Bradley's number. The clock on the wall read 3:05 a.m. He answered after 6 rings. Bradley's voice was irritated. The smell of alcohol and annoyance seemed to come through every word. "Dad, are you crazy? Do you know what time it is? I'm in New York, getting ready for a meeting tomorrow morning." I tried to keep my voice from trembling. "Bradley, I'm at the police station. They just rescued a child from Interstate 95. He looks exactly like Mason, down to every strand of hair. And he has a crescent-shaped birthmark behind his left ear." The breathing on the other end suddenly stopped. Silence took over. Even the background music behind Bradley's voice abruptly went quiet. I heard a glass fall and shatter across the floor. Bradley became openly agitated. His voice shifted from groggy to utterly panicked. It cracked. "What nonsense are you talking about? Mason is asleep at your house. It's a scam. You've fallen into a trap. I'm looking at him with my own eyes. This is not a scam. The boy has our family's birthmark. Explain this to me." "What the hell is going on?" Bradley screamed through the phone. Chaotic lies began pouring out of his mouth. "It's a high-tech scam ring. They use AI and plastic surgery. They want to extort money from our family. You need to get out of there right now. Turn him over to social services. Don't touch him. If you interfere, you'll destroy my career." The call abruptly disconnected. Bradley had hung up on me. I stood rooted to the spot. The mind of a contractor with 42 years of experience hammered relentlessly inside my head. Bradley's explanation made absolutely no sense. No scam ring could create an 8-year-old child with a biological birthmark accurate down to the millimeter just to have him wander through a snowstorm. My son was lying. A clumsy lie meant to cover up a deadly black hole. The crack in this family was not just on the surface. It had eaten all the way into the reinforcing steel. I turned back toward the glass. The child slowly lifted his head. His tear-filled eyes stared into empty space. Those eyes were begging for help. I took a deep breath. I walked through the door into the room. I decided I would face this ghost. I pushed open the wooden door and stepped into the room. Cold radiated from the child's soaking wet clothes into the cramped space. I moved closer. I dropped to one knee on the hard floor. I looked straight into his eyes. His dark eyes were filled with fear. His body instinctively shrank back. Sergeant Brody stepped in behind me. He placed a sheet of paper on the table. "Harrison, if you don't take him, we are required to turn this child over to Child Protective Services, CPS, tonight." I looked at the crescent-shaped birthmark behind the boy's ear. Bradley's panicked warning still echoed in my head. But I was a construction contractor. I had never abandoned an unfinished project. And I certainly could not abandon my own flesh and blood in the middle of a winter night. I picked up the pen. My hands were covered in calluses from years spent working on construction sites. I pressed down firmly and signed my name on the temporary foster care agreement. I took the child out to the truck. The pickup drove through the storm once again. The entire way home, the child sat silently in the passenger seat. He did not say a word. He only stared through the fogged-up window. When we got home, I led him into the bathroom. I turned on the warm water. The mild scent of soap filled the air. I gave him Mason's blue plaid flannel pajamas to wear. They fit him strangely well. I brought him into the living room. I made him a glass of warm milk. The child held the glass with both hands. His thin hands trembled. Then I froze. I stared at his hands. The child was rubbing his right index finger hard and repeatedly with his thumb. My heart skipped a beat. That was Mason's unconscious habit. Whenever Mason was nervous or frightened, he scratched his finger in exactly the same way. A behavior no one had taught him. A biological habit like an exact copy. The clock struck 4:30 in the morning. I settled the child on the soft sofa. I covered him with a thick quilt. At 5 in the morning, a terrified scream tore through the house. I rushed out of the room. The child was thrashing on the sofa. Sweat drenched his forehead. His eyes were squeezed shut. He was trapped in a horrifying nightmare. His hands clawed wildly at the air. He buried his face in the pillow, crying without making a sound. Extreme panic consumed his small body. I ran over. I sat down on the edge of the sofa. I wrapped my arms around his violently trembling shoulders. Watching him suffer, I felt as though a slab of concrete were crushing my chest. I leaned close to his ear. Instinctively, as a grandfather, I began to sing. I hummed a wordless melody. It was the familiar lullaby Martha, my late wife, had composed herself 30 years ago to soothe our own child, and later Mason. The melody had never been recorded. It did not exist on the internet or anywhere else. The tune slowly drifted through the silent room. The child suddenly stopped thrashing. His sobbing caught in his throat. His tear-filled eyes slowly opened. He stared straight at my face. Then his lips formed a hoarse whisper. He hummed the final 3 notes of the song after me. Every pitch was exact. Not a single beat was wrong. I froze. My calloused hand stopped in midair. Martha's lullaby. The crescent-shaped birthmark. The finger-rubbing habit. This child could not be an imposter. No AI technology or criminal gang could implant my family's private lullaby into this child's memory. This child was truly my biological grandson. Then, who was the child sleeping in the room next door? What horrifying secret had my son buried beneath the foundation of our family 8 years ago? Dawn was just beginning to break. The roar of an engine tore through the silence. A jet-black luxury Lexus SUV sped into the yard. It braked hard, churning up the muddy gravel. The door slammed open. Bradley and Monica stormed into the house. Bradley wore an expensive leather suit, but it was disheveled. Monica wore expensive sunglasses and a luxurious fur coat. Both of them looked polished, completely out of place against the rustic wooden house. They rushed in like people arriving to handle a crisis. When Monica saw the child curled up on the sofa eating a piece of bread, she froze. She yanked off her sunglasses. Her bloodshot eyes widened in horror. She let out a piercing scream. "Why did you bring Miles into this house?" Those words slammed straight into my ears. The room fell completely silent. I stood frozen beside the dining table. I stepped closer. My eyes locked onto Monica's face. I forced out each word. "Miles, since last night no one at the police station, including me, has known this child's name." "Why did you call him Miles?" Monica froze. Every trace of color drained from her face. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand. Panic showed clearly in every new crease on her face. Bradley immediately stepped between us. He pushed Monica behind him. Shameless lies continued pouring from my son's mouth. "Dad, you heard wrong. She's just panicking. She meant our friend's old golden retriever named Miles. She was so overwhelmed that she said the wrong name." I gave him a bitter smile. I looked straight into Bradley's eyes. "The dog Monica has been allergic to animal fur for 10 years. She hates dogs so much that she refuses to enter any house with pets. You really think you can fool a construction contractor with 42 years of experience with a ridiculous story like that?" Bradley clenched his jaw. The fake expression disappeared from his face. In its place was the cold gray face of a ruthless man. He stepped closer to me. Only a few centimeters separated father and son. His breath reeked of alcohol. He lowered his voice. The cruel threat struck my ears, one word at a time. "You're old, Harrison. You're just a confused retired contractor. Don't interfere in things beyond your understanding. If you don't turn this child over to CPS today, you will never see Mason again. I will take Mason to Europe immediately. You will lose this grandson forever." I looked at my son. My heart ached as if thousands of nails were being driven into it. Every father wants to believe his child. But the man standing in front of me was no longer the son I had raised. He had become a monster. He was using his own child to emotionally blackmail his aging father. Threaten me, I had stood on scaffolding dozens of meters above the ground in the middle of storms. I was not easily intimidated, but I understood one rule from construction sites: when you encounter a dangerous structure, you do not charge straight into it. You step back, reinforce your position, and prepare the tools for demolition. I lowered my head. I pretended to soften my voice and surrender with a tremble. "All right. I'm old. I don't want the family torn apart. I'll let CPS come and take this child away." Bradley smirked triumphantly. He immediately pulled out his phone and ordered CPS staff to come take custody of the child that very morning to erase every trace. He turned toward Monica with the proud look of a man who had just crushed his opponent. They had no idea that my retreat was actually the beginning of a plan to tear down the entire truth. After Bradley led Monica away, I walked over to the sofa. I looked at Miles. The skinny boy stared back at me with confused eyes. I made a vow to myself, no matter what it took, I would find out why they had hidden this child's existence. Have you figured out the secret yet? Leave your answer before watching until the end, and it would truly help spread the story tremendously if you hit the like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do that, but it is what keeps this entire channel going. Bradley and Monica went back into the bedroom to gather a few of Mason's belongings before leaving. I took advantage of every brief second. I quickly stepped into the room. I hugged Mason. My calloused hand slipped under the hem of the boy's warm wool coat. I secretly tucked a tiny tracking chip, no bigger than a button, into the inner lining. I stroked Mason's hair. I secretly picked up several strands of hair with the roots still attached from the boy's hairbrush. I carefully hid them inside a small plastic bag in my pants pocket. Half an hour later, Bradley's car pulled away. Child Protective Services staff also arrived to take custody of Miles. I stood at the door. I silently watched Miles being led into the vehicle. The boy's sorrowful eyes looked at me through the window. I tried to suppress the pain tearing through my heart. I pretended to surrender helplessly so Bradley would not become suspicious. The moment the CPS vehicle disappeared from sight, I rushed into the living room. I went to the pillow where Miles had slept the night before. I collected the thin strands of hair that remained. I placed them into a second plastic bag. I clearly labeled the outside bag A and bag B. I opened the tracking app on my phone. The green location dot representing Mason began moving across the map. It was not heading toward the expensive penthouse in downtown Manhattan. The green dot was moving toward a suburban mansion near the New Jersey airport. I realized Bradley was taking Mason there to rehearse and prepare the disguise for the switch during the fund inspection on Friday morning. I rushed out to my pickup truck. I pressed the accelerator all the way down. I drove to a run-down old industrial district on the outskirts of town. The smell of industrial exhaust and rusted metal hung heavily in the air. I climbed the rusty staircase of an old building. I pushed open the door and stepped into Victor Cole's office. He was a private investigator who had once worked as a police detective. The office was dark. The smell of cheap cigarettes mixed with the thick scent of strong coffee. I slammed a stack of cash and the 2 plastic bags containing the hair samples onto the desk. My hand clenched tightly into a fist. I need you to send these 2 hair samples to a laboratory for emergency forensic testing immediately. And I want you to dig through the entire past of my son and his wife. Find out what secret they have buried beneath the foundation of this family. Victor looked at the stack of money, then at the determined eyes of a construction contractor with 42 years of experience. He nodded. He immediately called a contact at the Forensic Examination Center to send the samples for expedited testing. The clock on the wall ticked forward each second, feeling heavy. Near evening, Victor's phone vibrated. An encrypted confidential data file was sent directly to his computer. Victor's face changed. He turned to look at me. His eyes were filled with shock. "Harrison, you should prepare yourself. What I just received is not merely a lie. It is a horrifying crime. When my private investigator broke through the security barrier of the maternity hospital from 8 years ago, a horrifying Pandora's box opened. My son is a wealth management specialist, but what he managed and discarded was the life of his own biological child for one reason: money. What you are about to hear may make you tremble with outrage." Victor pushed the cheap cigarette toward the edge of the ashtray. The gray smoke curled around the dim fluorescent light. His hand turned the large computer monitor toward me. The DNA analysis results from the Forensic Center appeared first. The 2 genetic profiles matched by 99.99%. The conclusion was printed in cold, bold letters. Mason and Miles were identical twin brothers. They were born from the same pregnancy. They shared the same blood. Victor clicked open another folder containing leaked medical records from Mercy Maternity Hospital. The data file had been stored for 8 years. The birth certificate appeared. The 2 children had been born exactly 14 minutes apart. Mason Alexander Mitchell and Miles Harrison Mitchell. But directly underneath was a long medical report marked in red. Miles had been born with an extremely serious congenital heart defect. The boy had severe aortic valve stenosis. He needed to undergo at least 3 complicated open-heart surgeries. The cost of treatment and intensive care would reach millions of dollars. My chest tightened. I was a construction contractor. When a building developed a foundation problem, a real contractor would pour every bit of money and effort into reinforcing it. I would have been willing to sell every excavator I owned and mortgage this house to save my own grandson. But my son was not. Victor clicked open a case file sent by a former colleague at the Pennsylvania Police Department. On a freezing winter night 7 years ago, heavy snow was falling. A plastic crib had been abandoned right in front of fire station number 4 in a remote town. A 1-year-old child lay curled up inside the plastic crib on the frozen snow. It was not a legal surrender. It was a cruel and completely unlawful act of child abandonment. They dumped the child there in the middle of the night and fled. A crime scene photograph appeared on the screen. The 1-year-old child was curled up inside a blue plastic crib. Beneath the rim of his left ear was a dark red crescent-shaped birthmark. My calloused hand tightened into a fist. My knuckles cracked. Rage erupted like a fire burning through my mind. They had thrown away their own child. Bradley and Monica had treated their sick biological son like a defective structure. They discarded Miles like construction waste to preserve their polished, luxurious life. They left the boy to live or die on his own in the middle of a winter night. I looked at Victor. My voice was hoarse and hard, like steel striking steel. Why didn't they report him dead? Why didn't they arrange a legal adoption instead of secretly abandoning him like that? Victor slowly took a sip of bitter black coffee. His gaze became razor sharp. Harrison, a cold-blooded person, never does anything without a reason. They hid Miles's existence not only to avoid paying for his medical treatment. They did it because of another enormous amount of money. And that was when the real cruelty began. I immediately left Victor's office. The pickup truck tore through the wind toward downtown. The law firm's skyscraper was covered in gray glass. I stepped into attorney Jonathan Blake's office on the 30th floor. Blake was a seasoned attorney. He opened the stack of documents Victor had sent over. He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Harrison, the answer is right here. Richard Sterling's will and trust fund. Richard Sterling was Monica's biological father, a late real estate billionaire. He despised Bradley and Monica. He knew they were reckless spenders. So he locked away his entire massive fortune. Blake pointed his finger at the clause printed in italics. Mr. Sterling stated it very clearly. Each living grandchild would receive $500,000 per year. This money would cover their upbringing and education until they turned 25. The funds would be dispersed directly to the parents to manage. The cruel truth was exposed. Bradley and Monica wanted to pocket all of that money. If they reported that Miles was sick or put him up for adoption, they would lose $500,000 every year. To receive the full $1 million annually, they had to prove that both children were still alive and healthy. I slammed my hand down on the oak desk. My voice trembled with outrage. But Miles was abandoned at the fire station. How did they fool the trust administrators for the past 7 years? Blake clicked open a surveillance video file Victor had obtained. The video was recorded in the lobby of the Trust Management Building in Manhattan. The footage showed the annual routine inspection. Bradley led Mason into the building. The boy was wearing a blue sweater. They went into the men's restroom on the ground floor. 45 minutes later, Bradley came back out. Walking beside him was Mason, but the boy had been changed into a green velvet jacket. He was also wearing a pair of fake prescription glasses. He was pretending to be Miles. They forced an 8-year-old child to live under 2 identities. They made Mason impersonate his twin brother during the inspections. They turned the child into a tool for extracting money. It was cruel psychological abuse. I clenched my fist. My contractor's hand trembled. I had built hundreds of buildings, but I had never seen a moral structure so rotten and corrupt. They abandoned their sick child, then forced the remaining child to pretend to be his brother so they could take the full $1 million every year. If you have followed the story this far, then it must be at least a little interesting. Help us with one quick small thing. Like and subscribe. Leave comment number 5 so I know you made it this far along with the city you love. So many people watch without doing it, but it costs you nothing and means a great deal to us. Blake closed the file. He looked straight into my eyes. We already have enough evidence of financial fraud and child abuse. But Bradley is a cunning man. He is preparing to take Mason out of this country. We only have until Friday morning. Just then, the phone on Blake's desk suddenly began vibrating violently. Bradley's number appeared on the screen. Blake pressed the speakerphone button. Static crackled through the phone line. Then Bradley's roaring voice tore through the silence of the office. "Harrison, you senile old man, you think you're so smart. What did you secretly slip into Mason's coat? A cheap tracking chip." His furious breathing came through the speaker. I remained seated in the chair. My calloused hand gripped the edge of the desk tightly. Bradley's voice became crazed and vicious. "I found that chip, and I've already filed a petition with the local court. I'm accusing you of severe cognitive decline. The fake medical report is being finalized. I'll have you committed to a public nursing home this very week. All of your accounts will be frozen. You will never see Mason's face again for the rest of your life." The cruel threat slammed straight into my ears. My own son. The child whose every step I had once guided with my own hands. Now he wanted to throw me into a nursing home. He wanted to erase me from my grandson's life. Attorney Blake looked at me. He motioned with his hand for me to stay calm. The mind of a construction contractor with 42 years of experience immediately went to work. When an enemy believes victory is already in their grasp, that is exactly when they are most vulnerable to a trap. You have to make them believe your foundation has completely collapsed. I rubbed my face. I spoke. I deliberately made my voice tremble. I choked back fake sobs through the phone. "Bradley, I'm begging you. I'm old. I really am confused. I was only worried about Mason. Please don't put me in a nursing home. Don't freeze my accounts. I won't interfere in your business anymore." Bradley's cruel, triumphant laughter came through the speaker. "Now you're scared. Too late. But if you obediently sign the papers giving up your guardianship rights, I'll let you see Mason one last time. This Friday morning at the Trust Administrators Review meeting in New York. Exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. If you don't show up to sign, you'll spend the rest of your life in a nursing home." The call abruptly disconnected. Bradley hung up himself. Silence filled the office. I wiped the fake tears from my face. My expression changed. The trembling disappeared. In its place was the cold determination of tempered steel. Attorney Blake looked at me. He gave me an impressed smile. "A perfect case of turning his own weapon against him, Harrison. He thinks he has backed you into a corner. He has no idea that he just personally scheduled the appointment for his own judgment." I stood up. I adjusted the collar of my rain-stained canvas coat. "We have less than 24 hours left. First, I have to get Miles out of CPS custody. Then we're going to New York." But how could I legally get Miles out of CPS when Bradley had already filed a claim accusing me of cognitive decline? Attorney Blake immediately drafted an emergency petition to the family court. He attached the official DNA test results from the forensic center along with the police records concerning Bradley's child abandonment case. Bradley's false allegation of cognitive decline was immediately dismissed entirely by the court. Within just 2 hours, the judge signed an emergency protective order. Temporary guardianship of Miles was granted directly to me. Blake and I rushed to the CPS Child Protective Services Center that very night. The CPS building was gray and cold. The harsh smell of bleach filled my nose. I walked through the dark hallway. I opened the door to the temporary residential room. Miles was sitting alone in the corner of the room. The boy was wearing an oversized gray donated sweatsuit. He held a colored pencil that had broken in half. His small back was hunched over. I walked closer. I dropped to both knees on the hard floor. My heavy work boots tapped softly against the tile. Miles looked up. His eyes were filled with sadness. Fear still lingered in his gaze. I held out my calloused hand. My voice was hoarse but warm. "Miles, come home with Grandpa. No one will ever be able to abandon you again." Miles's eyes filled with tears. The broken, colored pencil slipped from his hand. The boy lunged forward. He wrapped his arms tightly around my neck. His small body trembled in waves. I held my biological grandson tightly. An invisible source of strength seemed to rise inside my chest. I would use the rest of my life to reinforce this child's life again. Thursday night, the snowstorm began to clear. We boarded a private jet arranged by Attorney Blake. The plane tore through the darkness heading straight toward New York City. Miles sat beside me. The boy was wearing a warm red sweater. He had fallen asleep from exhaustion. His hand was still tightly holding my thumb. I looked out the airplane window. Dark clouds rolled below us. My construction contractor's hand, hardened by 42 years of work, tightened into a fist. Bradley and Monica thought they had everything under control. They thought I was a confused old man about to be thrown into a nursing home. They had no idea that tomorrow morning on the 42nd floor of a Manhattan building, an earthquake would flatten the entire castle of lies they had built. Friday morning. The clock struck 8:45. The truck carrying us stopped in front of a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. The morning sunlight reflected off the gleaming glass walls. I held Miles's hand and walked into the grand lobby. Attorney Blake and 2 police officers followed right behind us. We stepped into the elevator. The button for the 42nd floor lit up. The elevator began racing upward. The final battle had officially begun. The elevator stopped on the 42nd floor. A soft chime sounded. The metal doors slid apart. A luxurious hallway covered in red carpet appeared before us. I held Miles's hand tightly. The boy was wearing a bright red sweater. Beside me, Attorney Blake, Detective Victor, and 2 police officers walked forward with steady steps. We headed toward the trust boardroom. The floor-to-ceiling oak door was slightly ajar. Inside, Monica's fake laughter rang out. She was eagerly pouring tea for the board members. Bradley stood beside her. He straightened his expensive suit. Sitting at the corner of the table was Mason. The boy kept glancing nervously at the clock on the wall. He was getting ready to go into the restroom to change clothes and pretend to be Miles. Monica smiled gently and said to the trust representative, "Both Mason and Miles are perfectly healthy. Miles just went to the restroom for a moment. He'll be right back." I stepped forward. My hand, hardened by 42 years of construction work, shoved the heavy oak door wide open. The iron hinges let out a loud creak. The door flew open. I led Miles into the middle of the boardroom. Miles was wearing a bright red sweater, the exact outfit Bradley had just forced Mason to wear in preparation for the switch. The entire room fell silent. Monica turned around. The ceramic cup in her hand dropped to the floor and shattered. A sharp crash rang out. Tea splashed all over her expensive dress. The veins in Bradley's neck pulsed violently. His face turned gray as ash. Mason stared at Miles in confusion. The boy blurted out, "Brother Miles, oh my God, where did this little demon come from?" Monica screamed. She staggered backward until her back hit the wall. Her eyes widened in terror as if she had just seen a ghost. The 2 police officers immediately stepped forward. They pulled out a state arrest warrant. One officer spoke in a firm voice. "Bradley Mitchell and Monica Sterling. You are under arrest for federal financial fraud, identity fraud, child abuse, and child abandonment." The metallic clicking of handcuffs rang out. Bradley went into complete panic. He spun around and pointed directly at Monica's face. Cowardly accusations poured from his mouth. It was her. It was all her. She didn't want to spend money on Miles's treatment. She forced me to abandon the baby at the fire station. Monica went berserk. She lunged forward and slapped Bradley across the face right in front of the police officers. "You coward. You were the one who came up with the idea of switching clothes in the restroom." They screamed and clawed at each other. Their corruption and hypocrisy were completely exposed. I quickly stepped forward. I used my 2 calloused hands to cover Mason's and Miles's eyes. I pulled both of my grandsons into my arms, protecting them from the cruelty of their parents. 6 months later, the sky was clear. Warm sunlight stretched across the lawn in front of my house. Miles's heart surgery had been a complete success thanks to the medical funds that had been released. Miles and Mason were chasing each other around, their bright laughter echoing across the yard. Bradley and Monica were sentenced to 15 years in prison. I became the sole legal guardian of both children and the entire trust fund. A true family is not built on greed, status, or lies, but held together by love, selflessness, honesty, and responsibility. Material wealth and glamorous appearances can be gained easily and lost just as easily, but true family bonds can never be broken. Always stand on the side of truth, cherish your roots, and remember that real strength lies in choosing integrity over greed. Thank you for staying with Father's Hidden Card until the end of the story. Please subscribe to the channel for more intense family stories and meaningful lessons, where the truth may arrive late, but the consequences always find the right person. Throughout 42 years as a construction contractor, I witnessed many buildings collapse. No matter how magnificent a building may be, it will fall if its foundation is made from poor quality concrete. Family is the same. Relationships cannot be built on lies, selfishness, and money. The strongest foundation of a family can only be built with sincere love, honesty, and responsibility toward your own flesh and blood.